Welcome to the Teachers Talkin' podcast, hosted by Dustin and Ghazali Abdul Wahab. In this podcast, we discuss all things education and teaching, from innovative teaching methods to challenges to strategies and much, much more. In this discussion or roundtable-based podcast, we bring in educators from all around the world to talk about a variety of education topics so that we can support as many teachers as possible. We want this to be a place of inspiration, personal and professional development, and simply a place where we can elevate education together. Welcome to Teachers Talkin'. Everybody, welcome to another episode of Teachers Talkin'. I'm Dustin here with Ghazali, and we have been looking forward to this conversation. We've been planning it for a while. We actually recorded it one time, but didn't actually record. So we are doing this for a second time. But yeah, today it's just the two of us, and we're going to dig into a topic that matters for every school community, which is about building bridges with other cultures and what internationalization can really mean in everyday classrooms. So this episode is titled Building Bridges with Other Cultures, and our guiding question is, how can educators create meaningful connections across cultures locally, nationally, and globally so that students grow in empathy, understanding, and real-world readiness? And Ghazali, I think before we even start talking about the word internationalization, how do you go about defining the word culture in a school context? And why does that definition matter for the way that we teach?
That's definitely a very rich question to start with. I think that the way we define culture in schools shapes everything. What we teach, or who feels seen, and whether students develop genuine understanding or just surface level awareness. So it's basically almost encapsulates everything that we do in the school. And I guess a working definition of it would be the shared patterns of meaning that shape how people see the world, relate to each other, and move through their daily life. Yeah. So it includes the visible stuff, like the food, the clothing, the celebrations that you do in school, and also the invisible layers, which can sometimes be more important. Things like how families communicate, what respect looks like in the school, how people relate to time and authority, and most important in an organization or in a school is, of course, what counts as success, and even like what questions are appropriate to ask, in that particular setting. So why is this important? I think it's important because if we misdefine culture, as something perhaps like things other people do in faraway places, then we may accidentally create distance. And students start thinking that culture is something that's out there rather than something in here and something that they're swimming in almost every day. What about you, Dustin?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I really like that you talked about that there's sort of like the surface level culture, but then there's the invisible layer of culture, because generally when you talk about culture, people do think about it in chunks of whether, that's you're from this particular city or you're from this particular country, and then therefore things get associated automatically with you. That even goes to, gender-based cultures, sex-based cultures, race-based culture. There's these assumptions, and when you only look at those surface level culture, that's where bias and stereotyping and things like that come into play. But culture is so much deeper because it does come from how you were raised and who raised you and what your values and your morals and your beliefs and your ethic systems are. They're about, the things that you find important or not important. All of those things are part of a culture. And so it's interesting because I believe that we are all part of multiple cultures, right? Like I am from a culture of, I'm an American. So I have that culture, but I'm specifically from the suburbs of Chicago. And so I have that culture, but I'm also from a large family. And so I have that culture. I'm excited about football this weekend. It's wild card weekend, and my Bears are in the playoffs for the first time in a really long time. And so that
Wow.
that in and of itself is a culture, right? And so there's so much more to people. And that's why I think it's important for us to talk about what culture is, because if we're going to talk about how we build bridges across culture and across nations, we have to then know exactly what is culture in the first place. And when we talk about doing that with kids, it's a much harder thing for students to understand what culture is, because they are going to start by having that surface level, and we have to help them understand that there's much deeper levels and multiple deep levels beyond that. So I'm thinking then, with that in mind, how do we indeed help students to understand that culture isn't only other countries, but it's also differences across, neighborhoods, communities, languages, regions, sometimes only a couple of miles apart. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I think the most important thing is to let every student know that they are what we consider as cultural beings. Like nobody is away or apart from culture. So it's not culture is not something that's experienced only from by kids from immigrant families or the ones who speak another language at home. So it's about everybody's learned experience and what they go through, and that it is something that can make you unique and stand out from the rest, because the culture that you have at home may not be the same as the culture that you face when you are with other kids. So this is where we need to foreground the fact that culture is something that is unique to everybody. Yeah. So it is an experience in life that they go through that is very unique. And this is something that is not easy to do, because when you are in a school, you are immersed in a school culture. And when you're at home, you're immersed in your own traditional culture or your family's cultural background. So I guess by now the students, they know how to blend in from one mode to another easily. Yeah. So I think that this is something that needs to be foregrounded during lessons, so that they can see that it is something that they do automatically, and something that it is very important that they realize it is, even though it is automatic, it is something that impacts them tremendously. Yeah. And that's where we need to centralize our lessons to show how these things can actually impact their lives and moving ahead, because for like in my experience, when I'm in a multiracial setting, so it is very, very key for me to be able to show the importance of culture to my students, because they all come from different cultural backgrounds. Yeah. And it is, I think, something that's not easy to do, but if you manage to do that, it actually has that impact that allows them to assimilate within the classroom or with other students, assimilate themselves better. So I guess that's why I place an importance on it. It's something that's very, very important in our curriculum.
Yeah, and to build on that too, I think helping students to understand that even within them, they're already a part of multiple cultures. And so when you even say assimilate in, that doesn't mean assimilating into a singular culture. It means how you can
Yeah.
become part of multiple cultures,
Yeah.
right? Like I can
Yes.
be a Bears fan, which is one culture, but I can also be, I'm also a teacher, I work in schools and education, and that's a completely different culture that's separate from the like level of fandom and sports culture that I have. And
Yeah.
I can easily be around my family, but then I can also assimilate and be a part of somebody else's family when I'm like hanging out with my friends and things of that nature, right? Like we
Yeah.
that's what we're really talking about here, and helping people to understand that it's okay to understand, one, that you should know that you have multiple levels of culture, and two, that it's okay to be a part of other cultures, that they're not separate from one another. And I think the best way that you can do that with kids is through, one, authenticity in the classroom, being your authentic self, helping students get to know who you are. That's all part of the relationship building process in the classroom as well. And then helping students to think through, like, what are the things that are important to them? How have they grown up? All of those things to help them start to understand the cultural differences that you even have within the classroom, and how you're all of one culture in some ways and you're all of different cultures in other ways.
Yeah, totally agree with you. So what do you feel that is the what does it truly mean to you when you hear the phrase internationalization of education?
Mhm.
And what do you want teachers to understand about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that internationalization is not just about the flags and the food and the celebrations that different countries have and different people have, right? Like that is where, going back to the beginning here, where you talked about surface level culture, that is surface level culture at its finest. So when I think about internationalization of education, that's where I think we're talking about getting deeper into understanding the history of different culture, the ethics and values of different cultures, the things that are important to different cultures. And that starts with understanding your own area and then bridging that beyond. So that might start with understanding culture within your own classroom, and then your own school, and then your own community, and then your own state, your own country, and then thinking outside of your country and into other countries. Because nationalization or internationalization is really about how you get outside of just your own level of culture and start accepting and understanding the cultures of other people. That's what I'm thinking. How about you? When you hear the word internationalization, what comes to the forefront for you?
Oh, I think at its core, the concept of internationalization of education, I think it's about preparing students to think, collaborate, and act across differences. So it may not be just geographic difference, but differences in perspective, in worldview,
Mm-hmm.
even language for where I'm coming from. Basically, what we just call lived experience. It's developing the intellectual humility to know that your way of seeing things is not the only way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that is something that is very important.
I totally agree. And probably more important, in the era that we're living in right now than ever before, because it seems like so many people just have blinders on, and if they're not part of
Yeah.
your culture, then there's no other perspective. And I think that's
Mhm.
actually what's important when we talk about culture. It's understanding that different people have different perspectives, and that your perspective is not the only one that exists, and that you to understand and accept what other people see and believe, what their opinions are, that everybody has opinions, that everybody has beliefs and different belief systems, and that we can be accepting of those, because that's what culture is all about.
Yep. Totally agree. And I think what I want teachers to understand is that when you are teaching this culture, it's not an addition, it's not additive, it's integrative. So it's not like a unit that you squeeze in during a particular period of time during your lesson. I think it's a lens that you bring in to everything that you're already doing so that, it is something that doesn't feel like a burden to you. So but having said that, I think discomfort is part of the process because real internationalization asks students and teachers to sit with uncertainty, to realize that smart people disagree all the time about fundamental things, and to question assumptions that they are or they were previously comfortable with. So there's that level of uncomfortableness which
Mhm.
I think is natural and it has to be part of the lesson.
You have to be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable. Yeah,
And
you got it.
that's part of learning and understanding other perspectives and other cultures, right? That's what it's all about.
Yep.
You have to, that's when, so
Yeah.
when I say that you have to be accepting of what other people believe, that's what that comes down to, is the acceptance that there are, and you have to, and you're just like, well, that's not what I think. Well, other people do, and that's okay. So get comfortable
Yep.
with the fact that they don't think the same way that you do, right?
Yeah. And that can be shocking sometimes, right?
Uh-huh. It absolutely can. So then what's
So
the
then I guess,
go ahead.
yeah, yeah. So then I guess when we bring in this topic of internationalization,
Mhm,
right? I guess what's the real outcome that we are looking for our students in terms of, is it curiosity, is it
mm,
empathy,
mhm,
or communication skills, critical thinking?
mhm.
So how do you explain that to someone who's maybe skeptical?
I think it's about all of those things, right? Like when we're talking about what we want from building culture, it's to help for people to have empathy and feel for other people. It's so that we can communicate with other people. If we don't understand other people's perspective or accept other people's perspective, then we can't communicate well with them. So it is about empathy. It is about communication. It is about understanding perspective. It's reflective because you have to understand what your position is and where you come from and what you believe and what you think in order to connect that to what somebody else believes, what somebody else thinks, how somebody else was raised. It forces you to think critically. It can challenge your belief system and get someone to change position or change beliefs sometimes. I think it allows you to be more open-minded, which is going to lead to being more accepting of more people. And you can be more accepting without giving up what you value. You don't have to change your perspective as long as you can accept that somebody else has a perspective and you can still cohabitate. And so I think that all comes to, all of these things. So I don't think there's any real singular student outcome that we're looking for, as much as I think that the more we dive into culture and understand ourselves and understand other cultures, the more that we can be complete human beings. And that's what we're trying to do with students in the first place, is help them to grow into being their own self. And to be your best self, you have to be curious, you have to have empathy, you have to be able to communicate, you have to think through your perspective and the perspective of others, and you have to think critically, you have to be open-minded. All of these things but we learn these things over time. They're not a one-time thing. So where you talked about these aren't singular lessons, no, these are the types of things that you're working into your lessons on a regular basis. From an English perspective, if you're reading something, you should be talking about culture at any point in time. You could be talking about the background of characters and the location of characters and the values of characters. And you could do that the same when you're doing a history text or a science text. Like there's ways of talking about culture and perspective in anything that you read. That makes me then wonder, when we're talking a lot about sort of doing this at an individual sort of school level, local community level, even though we're talking about thinking beyond that. But how can educators actually start to build bridges with other cultures, especially if they have limited resources or time? Like when you think about this, what are the first steps that you think a teacher could take, next week?
Wow. Okay. So I think the most important first step has to be a mindset shift. So before any strategy, right, teachers need to believe that they don't have to be an expert on other cultures in order to open doors to them, right? You just need to be genuinely curious, like we mentioned before, willing to learn alongside your students. And that vulnerability is actually a gift, because that's exactly what you need to try to teach in your students as well. So you're really modeling things. So I guess practical first steps, something that they can do starting from tomorrow, even, is you could do an audit of what's already on your shelves and walls, and the students in your classroom. Who are they, and whose faces do the students see, or whose stories get told,
Mm,
and what names appear as the characters that they're reading, like you mentioned in the books. right? So and but they can also start asking questions differently. So instead of what did your family do this weekend, try what's a tradition your family has that you love, or what's something your grandparents taught you. Then that will show them that we value their history, where they come from, their culture. Then the topics on culture can come in naturally. Yeah. So it's a matter of, I guess, realizing that every classroom is already more or less international, right? You have people coming from diverse backgrounds. So ask your students to teach the class a word from their home language, yeah, their mother tongue, for example, or share a family's recipe. I guess it's about celebrating the differences in your classroom so that you are not adding things to your plate, but you're letting students fill it in. What do you think, Dustin?
I mean, I think exactly what you said. I think that I really love you saying that every classroom is already an international classroom. I think when we talk about internationalization, the first things that, at least the first thing that's come to my mind is thinking beyond your own nation, beyond your own country, and building those bridges internationally, which I do think is something that we should be working towards. I do think that we want to have a better connection with people, all over the place, and to get outside of our own local communities. But
Yeah.
to do that, you do have to sort of, just like you would scaffold a lesson, you have to scaffold getting to that place. So I agree. Talking about culture and perspective, I love the questions of, what's a tradition that is important to your family. I think even just asking students about what they value. If you are building expectations, norms in your classroom, and you're doing that collaboratively with your students, which I recommend you do, um, you have a great opportunity of learning about the cultures of your students, having your students learn about their own cultures, and coming and building a collective culture just in doing an activity like that, and where you're asking your students, what are the things that are important to you in the classroom? Or we all said that we think that we should respect one another. What does that mean? What does respect look like to you? What does respect feel like to you? Because it's different for everybody. And being able to have that conversation and have a common understanding of where we all stand, and coming to a commonality amongst a group of people, can help us build our own community and our own culture within the classroom, and we can pass that off as we continue to build forward, right?
So then, what challenges come up when we try to teach across
Mm-hmm.
cultures, for example, language barriers or misunderstandings?
Mm-hmm.
And how do we handle those challenges in a way that keeps the classroom safe and respectful?
Mm-hmm. I think I think this comes back to talking about perspective and helping people understand that there are different perspectives, that everybody comes from a different perspective and has a different perspective, and what does that mean? I think it's important to talk about impact and intent in this type of conversation, where we can have the intention, like our intent might be one thing, but the impact that that has on somebody else might be something that we didn't intend for it to be. When we talk about learning about different cultures, it's important to think about the backgrounds, what's happened to a people historically, or what values does a group of people have. Because if we don't look at those things, it's super easy for us to misunderstand the perspectives that those people come from, or the things that are important to them. It's going to breed bias, it's going to breed stereotypes. That's exactly how
Yeah.
stereotypes come, is not understanding somebody else's culture. In today's day and age, with the AI tools that we have, and other technology, I think language barriers are becoming less and less, whereas a language barrier in the past used to be very, very prevalent in some situations. Like, you used to be able to travel to other countries, and language could be an actual barrier. And today you could travel to other countries and it's much less of a barrier, both just because,
Yeah.
worldwide English has become, a pretty basic language, and outside of the United States, which, people are learning multiple languages from a young age. I wish we were doing that in the US. But I think that, and then with technology, all those language barriers are becoming less and less. So, the challenge really is allow teaching people to understand that there is something beyond you, and to be open to those things. And the biggest challenge is when people are not open, when it's that, no, it's my way of thinking is the only way of thinking. That's where the real barriers come. And it's very hard to change that mindset, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't work towards it. And I think that's actually why this is important to be talking about in school, because that's how it starts to shape somebody, is to help them think critically about other cultures. Because if you're not thinking critically about other cultures, then you're never going to change your mind. You're never going to be open to other ideas. You're never going to be open to other people. You're going to always stay within your own little bubble. And I think the whole point of this conversation is, how do we help people to break away from being inside of one little bubble and have multiple bubbles, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's really important, I guess, because some families may worry that that their children learning about other cultures means that their own values are being undermined, which is totally not the case. But it could also be because they've experienced real harm from diversity efforts,
Yeah.
that felt very performative or tokenizing. So I guess in some politically charged climates, even well-designed lessons can become problematic. Yeah. So I guess this is where we have to tread softly and take it step by step. We shouldn't be trying to change mindsets of the students all in one day. Yeah.
So then, if you're doing this in the classroom, um, and you're trying to start to build culture, and you're trying to help students to understand that they have a culture and that there's other cultures and other perspectives, all of these things, right? If this is what you're trying to do in the classroom, what are you looking for in your students to know that they're actually growing in their cultural awareness? That's beyond just sort of, repeating the, right words, I guess. How do you know that your students are building cultural awareness?
Right. That's a good question. I guess we start with questions. So instead of repeating the same words, they ask different questions. So like when you first start, you may have your students asking things like, why do they do that? Or that's so weird. How come? Right. But if they are in a growth mindset and they're ready to change, growth sounds different. You hear different questions like, is that true for everyone there or
Mm,
just some people?
mm.
Or they may ask, how do you think they see what we do? You see, so that's a sign of growth. So always be cognizant of the questions that your students are asking you, because the deeper layers underneath those questions actually reveal to you whether is it curiosity or is it stereotype
Mm.
that's be prevalent, right? So, secondly, I think the students start to recognize themselves as cultural beings. So what that means is that they realize that they've been immersed in this culture all their life without noticing it. So you hear them say things like, I never realized that was a cultural thing. I thought everyone did that, right? Or my family does it this way, but I guess that's not universal. So this is tremendous because it means they've moved from seeing culture as costumes other people wear to understanding that it is something that is more invisible, something that is breathed, something that is to do with character, personality, background. Yeah. So I guess when you see those moments of genuine surprise in your students, then you know, aha, they've got it.
And I think I like that you say it's kind of in the questions that they ask, or, even just in the things that they say, where you're
Yeah.
saying, oh, I never thought about that before, or, oh, I didn't realize that people in Singapore did things this way. That's really different from the way we do
Mhm.
things, but that's really cool.
Yep.
Just that's where you're really starting to hear your students making the cultural connections and being more open-minded of where other people come from. Okay, so we've talked so much here about the locality of culture and really in thinking about, cultures beyond our own. How do we actually capture and celebrate growth in cross-cultural understanding? How do we celebrate that our students are building culture without even having to make it a grade type of thing?
Oh, that is something that's very, very important. I guess we need to celebrate it, right? So I think the first thing that you need to do is you take like things like observation notes, which is very quickly it can be done, in like 30 seconds. So you keep a running document or you use sticky notes, and what you hear when a student is asking a question, which is actually perspective taking questions or talking about their culture in a particular narrative in the classroom. So you jot down like the date when it happened, a phrase that the kid said, right? Then over a semester, you will notice patterns start to emerge and you will see the growth in your students. And that is something that you can show and you can then celebrate together that you look, this is what you have done over time. And I've seen your growth. You may not realize it, but these are real evidence of what I see in you. And I'm really proud of what you've done. So giving that affirmation, yeah, I
Hmm.
think is very, very powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think it's quick. Anytime we talk about the things that we want to build into our classrooms, the first thing that comes to people's minds is how I'm going to turn that into a lesson, or how am I going to grade that thing, or whatever. But not everything
Yes.
needs a grade attached to it, and not everything needs to be its own independent lesson. And culture, it can be its own
Yep.
independent lesson, and it can have a grade attached to it, especially early on
Yep.
when you're just
You don't
starting to
need to
build it.
assess it too.
Yeah, but it's
Yeah.
really, I like that you take it to just, it's the growth, and then to have a personal conversation with kids and just to own, even in a public, like, oh, a month ago you would have said this, and today you have a new perspective, and that's because of the way in which you have looked at and accepted culture.
Yeah. That's cool.
It
Yeah.
is.
So I guess once you get there, now the important question is once you get there and you see that the students get it, right? So then how do you sustain and deepen cultural connections over time so that then this becomes part of your classroom identity and not
Hmm.
just once off project?
I mean, it's that it needs to be an everyday piece in your classroom. Like, if you're really talking about building culture, then you are really talking about doing that on a regular basis in every day, or most days in your room. You have some level of things that are connected to culture. That's how you build capacity. It's no different than, to me, it's no different than building in routines and expectations in your classroom. Like, you have to do that with consistency in order to help build habit. And if you're going to have students open their minds and be accepting of other cultures, then you have to do it on a regular basis. You have to do it on a regular basis so that you can
Yep.
build that muscle, so that students have that, and they can, and because once you build, it's like building a habit. Once you have a habit, you can then go off and do the thing on your own regularly. So once you build the muscle for students about understanding and being accepting of other cultures, and you practice that on a regular basis, or you talk about it on a regular basis, that consistency is what builds that muscle for kids to then be able to do that outside of the classroom on their own, or to do it even in the classroom on their own, for them to be the ones that initiate the conversation.
Nice. Yeah. So I guess that is something that is you've nailed it right there. Maybe for me, some of the things that you can do in the classroom, like is to have some really specific activity that foregrounds the cultural moment. So for example, you dedicate like a particular day, maybe a Friday. It can be your window and mirror moment, for the students, where you share a short story or a picture or a question from outside. your community. Yeah, it doesn't take very long. It could be like 5 minutes, 10 minutes kind of thing. So then it becomes something that they expect, and then the students can start bringing their own right culture into the classroom as well. Yeah, so that is something that is can be quite powerful because you don't just bring in the culture, your culture, students' culture, but cultures in general, different cultures that may not even exist in the classroom at that moment. But just to show the students that the diversity is really, really tremendous.
I think you could even do that through whether it's once a week, like a Friday or a Monday, because you could do it like following a weekend, or maybe
Yeah,
just even in your like daily warm up questions, you could be doing current
yeah,
events. You could be talking about cultures and traditions. You could be talking about you know the things that you did over the weekend that are connected to the values of your family, et cetera, et cetera. Like there's so many ways that you could bring these in and do it in short ways without it like hijacking an entire day's lesson or something. So I have one last question before we kind of start to wrap this topic up because we've spent so much time really just talking culture. How do we take this whole idea and start to bridge it outside of our own classrooms to connect with other cultures, especially internationally? So we're talking about building bridges and we're talking about internationalization. So how do teachers actually start to connect, not just think about, but connect with people in other communities and in other parts of the world? How do we do that?
okay. So I guess this is maybe in my setting we have an advantage because every school is given a budget to actually send the students overseas to meet other cultures face to face. And I realized the power of this because during the COVID period when we couldn't leave the country, what we did to replace this program was to use Zoom. So people, for example, the students would speak to other students from Cambodia, and the Cambodian students will showcase the culture in a PowerPoint slide. But I realized this was not very effective.
Oh,
It's different when you actually. It's cool, but it's not very effective because you can't sit through 3 hours of a PowerPoint slide from one student after another.
yeah.
It gets very dreary very fast, so it's very hard to maintain their engagement level, right? Yeah, it's really different when you actually get to visit the country itself.
Mm-hmm.
You get to talk face to face. You get to experience their food. You get to smell their kitchen while they're cooking the food. You get to play their games together. It's a totally different level.
Mm.
Yeah. So I guess that's something that is we missed during the COVID period, and so now we are ramping back up again. So, like for example, my school has sent students all the way to China, Vietnam, Cambodia. Yeah. So we are visiting these places to get in touch with other cultures. That's how important we feel that these experiences are for the development of our students.
I think that's really cool. And I do agree, like being able to go and immerse yourself in somebody else's culture. But then I wonder, is it, and it's all hindsight, if you go back to, if you were to like rewind back to COVID, and let's not do that. But if you were, rather than getting on a Zoom in
No,
which,
no.
yeah, but rather than getting on a Zoom, in which students are doing presentations to showcase their culture, you could almost do something like a speed dating where you get one on one to have a conversation with somebody else. Cause I think that conversation piece is the bigger piece, is talking with people. Like, how
Yeah,
did you and I connect here? We connected on LinkedIn, then we came to this podcast, and
yeah,
we have learned each other's culture and about each other through having conversations, but we've never met person to person. But I feel like I've met you
yeah,
in person because of the amount of conversation that we've had, right? And so I think there's opportunities of
yep,
connecting with classrooms in other parts of countries, in other parts of the world, where you can do just that. You can swap papers, you can just get on calls every once in a while just to like talk with people in other places and get to know other people and immerse yourself in those other cultures. And if you get that opportunity of being able to travel outside of your community and go somewhere else to immerse yourself in a culture, then, awesome. I know just over the winter break, one of the schools, that in the network that I work for took a bunch of students to another state and they did like a work study program, and they all stayed on this like estate in the southern United States, together. And it was very family, but it was a very, very, very different atmosphere for our students who are from Chicago to go and like stay on a farm basically in a southern state. It's just very, very, very different cultures. So what an experience those students probably had, and I'd be interested to talk to some of them and know what sort of new insights were they able to gather from doing an activity like that, where they were able to do that. Our sophomores have opportunities too. We call it Summer of a Lifetime, where our sophomores apply and they get matched up with different universities. So they go spend a week or 2 weeks, 3 weeks on a university campus and get to understand sort of what college life is like there, which is a whole other level of culture. But getting that week to 2 week
Yep.
experience of doing something that's so different from what your day to day is, I agree, is something that really is really important when you're talking about really trying to get into other people's cultures. But I think even just finding ways of connecting with classrooms in other parts of the world, no matter what it is, whether it's through projects, whether it's through swapping assignments and doing editing, whether it's through meeting and just talking, there are, the internet has brought us ways of being able to connect with people that are well outside of our own school communities. And that should be ultimately the strive. Once you build culture and get your students to understand culture, now it becomes taking it from your classroom community and building it across with other classroom communities within your school and outside of your school. So, final thoughts, Ghazali. Do you have any starting points or any sort of last bits of thoughts or advice that can help teachers to, build culture and build bridges with other cultures without, especially without being overwhelmed with the idea of doing it?
Yeah, I think I'll just repeat the main core ideas, which is that you don't have to be an expert on world cultures. You don't even need a curriculum overhaul or a budget increase or administrative buy-in. You just need to be curious about the human beings already in front of you, your own students. And you need to build bridges to human beings beyond your walls. So one genuine connection at a time, right? So if you do that, you're already doing the hardest part, right? Caring enough to ask those important questions, thinking deeply about what genuine growth looks like, and of course, refusing to settle for those simple surface level versions of answers, right? So trust in that. And I think to the teacher who can do that, you will always keep growing yourself and showing up with curiosity and humility so that your students get to model that. And I guess that's how you build bridges, right? And that is the kind of teacher that changes life, including their own.
Wow. Way to close it up.
Yeah, man. I'm not getting paid for this,
All right, so that is going to conclude another episode of Teachers Talking. So, to our listeners, thanks as always for tuning in. This is, I think, one of the topics that can change the way that students see themselves and the way that they see the world. So, as Ghazali said, this really is life-changing type of work and a life-changing type of topic. So, if you are enjoying Teachers Talking,
It's a labor of love.
it is. So if you're enjoying Teachers Talking, please make sure that you subscribe, leave us a review, share this with fellow educators. You know that new episodes drop every other Monday. And if you'd love to be a guest on Teachers Talking, we would very much like to have you on as a guest. You could just complete the show notes. You could complete the interest form in our show notes. You don't need to be an expert in anything, just passionate about education, stories to share, strategies to share. We love chatting with other educators. So thank you as always, and until next time, keep on teaching. See ya, everybody.